I saw where you said the WNBA, they're targeting Caitlin Clark. What do you mean by how she's being guarded or,
I
enforced?
think, yeah, I think you and I both know the landscape that we live in today, both sports wise and non sports wise, right? We are in a red blue. And if you're red, you can't agree with blue. And if you're blue, you can't agree with red. Whereas
Picture this: a legendary Hall of Fame coach who built an empire over decades, suddenly brought to his knees by a single word from the very player he once dismissed. Just 2 minutes ago, reports confirmed that Caitlin Clark delivered the most devastating blow in women's basketball history, and it wasn't even close. This isn't just about a rejected contract offer. This is about the most expensive mistake ever made in sports and the perfect revenge that followed. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it comes in the form of quiet brilliance that shakes an entire sport to its core. For Caitlin Clark, revenge wasn't a heated Twitter war or a dramatic press conference. It was something far more powerful: a simple no that carried the weight of years of disrespect, dismissal, and pure arrogance from one of basketball's most untouchable figures. When that word left her lips, it didn't just reject $1 million offer. It destroyed the legacy of a man who thought he could never be humbled. To understand how he got here, we need to rewind to where it all began. Before Caitlin Clark became the face that launched 1,000 ships in women's basketball, before she was selling out arenas and breaking television records. She was just a wide-eyed kid from Iowa with one impossible dream. And that dream had a name: UConn. The University of Connecticut wasn't just another basketball program to young Caitlin. It was basketball heaven on earth. The place where legends like Diana Taurasi, Maya Moore, and Breanna Stewart were forged into champions.
most things are in the middle. If you're a college player and you're a great college player, like Caitlin was, the delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on what are, like, she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP at the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning. So if you're a WNBA player, and believe me, I've coached the best, and I've pissed them off a lot, and they let me know about it. But they were tremendously disrespected.
UConn was the mountaintop, and Geno Auriemma was the gatekeeper who decided who was worthy enough to climb it. Clark herself admitted it in interviews years later, saying she loved UConn and thought they were the coolest place on earth. So when recruitment time came around, the path seemed obvious. The most gifted offensive talent of her generation knocking on the door of the greatest recruiter the sport had ever seen. It should have been a match made in basketball heaven, a partnership that would have rewritten the record books and cemented both their legacies forever. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. When Clark looked toward Storrs, Connecticut, hoping for that life-changing phone call, UConn barely looked back. According to Clark herself, the interest was never really there. Geno's staff reached out casually through her AAU coach, throwing out a few breadcrumbs here and there, but the man himself, the legend who prided himself on spotting talent before anyone else, never once picked up the phone to speak directly to Caitlin or her family. The message was crystal clear.
And none of them are going to say it, but human nature is, okay, this kid's coming into the league. And Diana said it best: this kid's in for a rude awakening. And they all jumped over her, but they didn't read the whole thing that she said. But nobody's printing. Diana Taurasi was right. This kid's on the wrong team. She's got the wrong skill set to handle the physicality of that league. And she's a rookie. And if you're a WNBA player, if you're any kind of player, you're going to say, I'm going to make a statement. Targeted by society, targeted by her looks, targeted by her reputation, targeted by the disrespect that they've shown to the WNBA. There's a huge target on this kid's back. I thought Cameron Brink said something really smart. She said, no, they're expecting this rookie class to be.
And it cut deep. She wasn't their priority. She wasn't their chosen star. In Geno's mind, she wasn't UConn material. And when people pressed him about it later, his explanation was a masterclass in arrogance. wrapped in excuses. He claimed he had already committed to Paige Bueckers early and didn't want 2-point guards at the same time. Fair enough on the surface. But then came the kicker that turned a simple excuse into an insult that would echo for years. Geno suggested that if Clark really wanted UConn, she should have called him. Think about that for a moment. The most decorated recruiter in women's college basketball history, a man known for locking up talent years before anyone else even noticed, looked at Caitlin Clark and essentially shrugged his shoulders, then had the audacity to blame a teenager for not chasing him harder. That wasn't just a missed opportunity. That was disrespect of the highest order. And deep down, Clark filed it away in a place where slights never get forgotten. So the future superstar chose Iowa, a program without UConn's banners, without their mystique, without their legacy. But Iowa gave her something Geno never offered, belief. From day one at Iowa, Clark wasn't just another recruit trying to fit into an existing system. She was the system. She took ownership of that program in a way that UConn's rigid structure never would have allowed, and what followed was nothing short of revolutionary. The number started small, but grew into something unprecedented. Packed gyms became the norm in Iowa City. Her logo three-pointers weren't just shots. They were statements that basketball was evolving, and she was the one pushing it forward. Entire arenas turned into shrines for Clark's game, with road games feeling like rock concerts where fans showed up just to witness her magic, even if it meant cheering against their home team. Television ratings shattered records that had stood for decades. Networks that once treated women's basketball as an afterthought suddenly put Clark front and center because she wasn't just bringing fans, she was creating an entirely new audience. Little girls who had never cared about basketball were suddenly begging their parents for Clark jerseys. Casual sports fans who couldn't name another women's player were tuning in religiously just to see what impossible shot she'd hit next. Meanwhile, Geno watched from his throne in Connecticut, and instead of admitting that he had missed out on the greatest offensive player of a generation, he did what prideful men do when they're wrong. He doubled down. Rather than showing the humility that might have earned him respect, he chose arrogance over honesty. Instead of acknowledging Clark as the face of the sport, he tried to downplay her rise with a pattern that became as predictable as it was insulting. Every time Clark's name came up in interviews, the same script followed. A sprinkle of praise, wrapped nicely in a package of dismissal. When asked about her game, he'd smile and deliver lines like calling her fearless, but comparing her to a little kid in the driveway. On the surface, it sounded flattering, but listen closer and you'd hear the condescension dripping from every word. In Geno's world, Clark wasn't a once-in-a-generation athlete. She was just a kid messing around, nothing more. And he didn't stop there. Anytime someone tried to put Clark in her own category, he made sure to drag her back down into comparisons with his own players. Over and over, he would pivot to Paige Bueckers. If Clark was tough, well, so was Paige. If Clark connected with fans, sure, but Paige did too. The compliments were always tethered to a reminder that in Geno's world, UConn still produced the stars worth talking about. But here's the problem with backhanded compliments delivered by bitter men. People notice. Fans noticed. Analysts noticed. Even other coaches noticed the insecurity bleeding through his words. They saw a man who couldn't give pure respect without twisting it, without inserting himself into the story. The more he did it, the smaller he looked next to Clark's growing legend. Then came June 2024, and the mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. During an interview on the Dan Patrick Show, Geno Auriemma did the unthinkable. He didn't just take shots at Caitlin Clark anymore. He went nuclear on the people who supported her. Think about that for a second. This is a Hall of Fame coach with multiple national championships, supposedly representing the pinnacle of the sport, and instead of celebrating the energy Clark brought to women's basketball, he insulted the very lifeblood of the movement. His words were brutal and calculated. He called her supporters delusional, unknowledgeable, and went as far as labeling them so stupid that it gave women's basketball a bad name. Why? Because fans dared to predict that Caitlin Clark could finish in the top 4 of MVP voting as a rookie. To him, that wasn't just wrong, it was laughable. To him, Clark's millions of new fans weren't passionate. They were a problem that needed to be corrected. But here's where Geno's arrogance turned into his downfall. Clark didn't need to respond with angry tweets or press conferences. She had something far more powerful than words, the basketball court. And what she did on that court didn't just prove him wrong. It obliterated his credibility so completely that his comments became one of the worst takes in sports history. She went out and won Rookie of the Year. She made first team all WNBA. And when the MVP voting was revealed, she finished exactly fourth, precisely where her so-called delusional fans had predicted she would land. Every insult, every dismissal, every arrogant soundbite crumbled in the face of cold, hard reality. The man who saw himself as the gatekeeper of basketball knowledge was exposed as bitter, out of touch, and desperately clinging to relevance. But Clark's silent demolition of Geno's credibility was just the opening act. The real revenge was still coming, and it would arrive in a way that nobody saw coming. You see, while Geno was busy trying to control narratives and protect his ego, he found himself in a position where words weren't enough anymore. He needed action. He needed Clark to validate him, to attach her star power to something with his fingerprints on it. Enter Unrivaled, a bold new 3-on-3 basketball league co-founded by Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, with Geno deeply involved in its creation. The league had money, hype, and ambition, but what it didn't have was a face. For all the big names attached to the project, there was only one player who could truly legitimize it. Only one name powerful enough to bring in the millions of fans who had discovered women's basketball through her magic. So after years of dismissals and insults, Geno finally did what seemed impossible just years earlier. He came begging. Reports confirmed that Unrivaled made Clark a massive offer, over $1 million for just an 8-week season, one of the richest contracts ever offered in women's basketball history. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The same man who once wouldn't pick up the phone to call her in high school was now waving $1 million check, practically begging her to save his project. The same coach who told the world her hype wasn't real was now trying to cash in on that exact hype. The same man who called her fans delusional was now depending on those same fans to buy tickets and make his league profitable. It was the ultimate role reversal, a power shift so dramatic it could have been scripted for Hollywood. Geno had gone from gatekeeper to salesman, from kingmaker to beggar, and the fate of his league rested entirely in the hands of the player he once dismissed as not good enough for his program. But when that $1 million offer landed on Clark's table, she didn't see opportunity. She saw something else entirely. A test, a power play, a desperate grab from the very man who had spent years trying to minimize her impact on the sport. And when she gave her answer, the payback was absolutely perfect. Her response was as simple as it was devastating. No, not, let me think about it. Not, we need to negotiate. Just no. No explanations, no hesitation, no second thoughts. One word that carried more weight than all of Geno's interviews, insults, and excuses combined. That single syllable was a message heard around the basketball world. I don't need you, I don't need your league, and I don't need your validation. The humiliation was total and immediate. Social media erupted with fans, celebrating the ultimate karma, clowning Geno for thinking Clark would ever bail him out after years of disrespect. Without Clark, Unrivaled lost its star, its magnet, its face before it could even properly launch. The $1 million offer wasn't just money, it was an admission that the league needed her infinitely more than she needed it. This wasn't just a contract rejection. This was a cultural earthquake that signaled the end of an era. For decades, coaches like Geno decided who mattered in women's basketball. They were the gatekeepers who set the rules and controlled the narrative. But Clark's rejection proved that those days are over. The future belongs to players who don't need permission to shine, who can build their own empires and walk away from $1 million checks without blinking. Geno's mistake wasn't just ignoring Clark as a teenager. His mistake was believing the sport couldn't move forward without him. Now the world watches as the game grows bigger than he ever imagined, with his fingerprints nowhere to be found on its most important moments. Clark didn't just take his crown. She burned the throne he thought he'd sit on forever. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you serve revenge. Quietly, perfectly, and with a simple word that changes everything.